great. I'm really, really delighted to be here in front of all of you to be presenting part of my journey. And I named it In Search of Authenticity because it involves my personal exploration on a spiritual level, on a professional level. And I've put together something for you so that I can share what I have learned. And then I feel that there are so many similar journeys that we are on and we can learn from each other. So please feel free to chime in. If you have any questions, you can interrupt me. I would also like to thank you, Lydia and Father Kelly, for giving me this platform to present and to make good use of it. So, In Search of Authenticity is, like I mentioned, a quest that started a few years ago, especially. And to explain this journey, I should take you back to my childhood. It's all the way back to my influences in the city of Mumbai. I grew up in India, and the city of Mumbai is very similar to New York. It is packed with skyscrapers, a lot of traffic, unpleasant smells. The only difference I would say is it's not as cold in Mumbai, it's nice and warm. And the city had ever-changing skylines. New buildings came up. The whole urban structure kept changing every day. It was a more chaotic atmosphere. And my growth in Mumbai was like growing up in any other global city where you are caught up in the race of moving forward, of finding your identity. And then during summer vacations, we used to travel to a place called Kerala, which is the south part of India. And this is where my grandparents live. And going to Kerala was a sense of freedom for me. So just to give you a background, Kerala is lush green, like you can see in the image. The landscapes are tropical forest, pristine rivers. And the architecture of this place is very humble. The whole lifestyle of this place is very humble. It is more of being in unison with nature, in harmony with the place, the local context. And there is no race here. You just live the life, enjoy the life, breathe the fresh air. So for me, this was something I used to look forward to, to go to Kerala during the summer vacations. And my grandfather's house was, nestled in this deep tropical woods. And the fascinating thing about this place was when I remember playing with my cousins in the outdoor spaces of the backyard. And there was a sense of freedom that I experienced. I was so much present in that place, just as me, just as I would be, without any definition of who I am, without any identity crisis. Even as a kid, it's funny that I had all these questions going on in my head. And I would just enjoy the stillness that's present in nature. I remember the favorite pastime of mine was to see the patterns cast on the ground by the leaves when sunlight filters through them, and the changing patterns. So you're so much aware of the time, you're so much aware of the passing day, and you're there in that moment. You're not separate. And the architecture, like you can see, is very humble. So it's built with local materials. It's built with the mud, the clay that is available in that local area. The architecture is also climate responsive. So they use materials such that it helps them to provide thermal comfort, and they do not resort to HVAC system or heating systems. But it's all, the architecture itself helps to maintain the necessary warmth or the coolness that you need in that space. And it's interesting, I'm not sure if many of you know about this design, which is called a courtyard typology. So courtyard typology is very prominent in tropical regions. It's nothing but an open space in the house, in between the house. And all the rooms are arranged along this open courtyard. So what it does is, while you're in the house, you're at the same time outside, because you have the view of the sky, you have the fresh water coming in, you have the rain pouring down. Um, and I remember sitting by the steps, with my family and having chai, which is the Indian tea latte, or chai latte that you guys call it. And just enjoy the evening with my siblings or with my family. And dwell in those every moment, just as I should be with my loved ones. And this image can show you, it's to convey how crazy I am when it comes to the material aspects, and how deeply I was moved by the perceptions, the perceptive level of our senses. So architecture for me is not just about vision, not just as an object, but it's about awakening all of our senses, our touch, our sense, like our smell. How can we heighten all these experiences? And in Kerala, the roofs are made of clay tiles, and they soak up the rain, like they become a part of this rain. So as the rainwater falls down, you can see the choreography of the water movement. It's very poetic, and I'm not good at poetry, so I'm going to stop right there. But you get what I'm saying. So with all that in mind, and this was during my early childhood, and when a decision was to be made as to what career would I choose, in India especially, when the two prominent career choices are either become a doctor or an engineer, I decided to work as a brain and become an architect. And I did my undergrad in architecture in India, and I was so excited that this is the kind of space that I want to be designing, where people feel good, where architecture can make you feel free and want you to become better, get in touch with yourself, with your true self, not the identities that the world imposes on you, but just you. Can architecture do that? And that was my intention about going to an architecture school. And unfortunately, you all have those moments where once I went to the school, I realized the famous architects, were designing things like this, which is, I don't know, a blog, or this one where, I don't know, cucumber? I don't know what the concept is, honestly. But these are really famous buildings. I'm sure you guys know about these buildings. And I was so bothered by this as to how can architects design such structures, because we are aware of the impact these buildings can cause on the inhabitants and on the city and on people who are walking by in those spaces. And studies have shown that our mental health, our physical health is continuously impacted by the shape, by the configuration of buildings. So why do we keep designing buildings like this? And this is a housing project in Copenhagen, which was designed by Bjørk Engels, architects in the room will know who he is. And he chose to have this stark, pointed balconies. And it was all in the name of doing something different, to do something, fancy, to get your name out there. So this egotistic approach to architecture bothered me, as to where are we designing for people? Architecture is supposed to be for people. Where is the users in any of these buildings? Why are our designs so removed from what the people need today? Or even this, which is Frank Gehry, super famous architect. He was my professor at Yale, but I never complimented him for his work. The concept for this one was crushed paper. He just literally crushed paper, and then he looked at it, well, that was like an interesting form, and then became the building. So I was like, it cannot stop there. Architecture is more about what are you giving back? How are you uplifting people who are using it? It cannot remain as an object. And in this time, more than any other time, I think architecture has become this notion of object, where it's all about seeing, about your visual perception, and everything else, all the other senses, is gone for a toss. So I was really in that crisis of understanding what architecture meant to me, and this is what I learned in school. So it was a time where I sat down and was like, is this what I really want to do? Are people not aware of these things? Like, how are the public receiving these these designs, and how are these even getting built, in the first place. So as curious as I always have been, I'm a very curious person, I ask a lot of questions. So I went around asking random people, common people, as to what architecture meant to them. Because we architects can define in the whole architecture jargon, but when it comes to common people, how do they relate with architecture? So these were some of the definitions that they gave me. Architecture is a synergy between engineering and art, an interplay between designing something usable and aesthetically appealing, said Suraj, who is a doctor. Architecture is a structure that serves several purposes, practical and aesthetical. Architecture is a way to look at the city differently, says Kyle, who's a creative writer. He's also my coffee guy. So, if you see the common denominator in all these definitions, they either define architecture as a structure which serves practical and aesthetic reasons, or as a way to look at the city. So it's always to do with a structure and it stops there. If it serves practical function, it's good. And if it's aesthetic enough, it's good. But is that all architecture can do? Does it just stop there? Can we take it forward? Can architecture, when we are aware of the impacts that architecture is causing us, can we use architecture to heal, to make us happy, to improve our lives, to improve our quality of living? Can we do that? Let me show you some examples that can better explain as to how badly architecture impacts us. On your left is an image of the office, which is a typical open office concept that's prevalent in today's times. There's a whole lot of explanation of the concept that goes behind it. But in these kind of spaces, you often feel confined. You often feel that you're always under the surveillance of somebody, either the technological surveillance or people are watching you. So you feel intimidated. And these feelings, your thinking perceptions turns into actions. And that can turn into your kind of space. Whereas on your right is an open space where you are free. You are so linked with the outside, and the way the furniture is disposed, you are free to express yourself. You are immersed in that place. You are not worried about who is seeing me or how should I behave. Like, you are free to express yourself. Another example is on your left there's a dining room, and on your right is a dining space. The reason why I put these together is to explain the importance of using natural materials in design. So in today's time, there's a surgence of artificial materials, synthetic materials, and these materials induces in us a feeling that everything is permanent, that aging process of materials is defied in synthetic materials. So what happens is it induces in our mind that instead of embracing change, we resist change. Whereas if you have a space that's more natural and that's raw, made out of clay, made out of cement, made out of natural wood, recycled metal, you are constantly aware of its aging process. So when your hands touch the grain of the natural wood, you are aware of how the natural wood feels against your skin. You're aware that natural products, natural materials are not perfect, and it ages as time passes by. And that induces in you an attitude towards change that becomes a part of your personality. Like, these are long-term, implications, but in a nutshell, this is what happens. So how do these simple choices of materials impact your way of looking at life? It's a bigger question. This is an example where living in high-rise buildings is a trend now. The higher you live, the better. These are like the most expensive apartments, because you have good views, you have, they promise you everything, privacy, gardens and whatnot. But studies have shown that children growing up in these apartments, they tend to be more, develop social anxiety as they grow up. Because when they're kids, they are not used to people's expression on a street level. They don't know what emotions look like. You are so cut off from the street level interactions because your perspective of the world is so different when you're out there. Whereas living in a space which is low rise, and then you have these common spaces where there is interaction, there is emotions. So you're always in tune with how others behave, how others interact. You know what is a connection what does human interaction look like? And kids growing up in these kind of places, you become more attuned to the societal requirements. New York. Everybody here loves New York, I assume. I just had a conversation and she loves New York. So I would say I love New York too. It's great. It's fascinating. The thing with New York is it's grid planning, and I'm sure you're aware of that, right? So the grid planning was laid out for maximum efficiency, for efficient transportation, for efficient services. But what it does is, as you travel through the streets of New York, because everything is so straight, you know where you're going, there are no moments for chance encounters. There are no moments of pause. It doesn't slow you down. It's meant to walk fast. It's meant to walk past it. There's no time to look at another person's face. You just keep moving, because if you stop, then somebody else will come and push you. That's New York. But in comparison to like a medieval town, or like an old town, where the streets curve and you are to slow down your pace. And then in that slowing down pace, you look up and you see another person's face and you exchange a smile. Or how do you almost tend to know people's name. I'm sure like if you guys come from a small town, you know what life is. It's different there, and life is different in New York. And this one is how spaces can be a stimulant for crime. So on your left, you see the modernist housing blocks, which are the social housing for low-income residents. And the design of these houses, as somebody described, is designed in a way so that you do not succeed. It is very important that we as people, like as community people, are aware of these things, because it bothers me a lot that as architecture fraternity, as we don't pay attention to these things. These are like on back burner, these projects, because they don't get us any revenue, apparently. But it's so important to give importance to these kind of projects, because these are low-income housing, and they deserve to be a part of the community as any other people are. But the design of these buildings are such that they have these vast open spaces, which they call green spaces, but it is all fenced, and they have no connection with that outer community. So people avoid these spaces to walk. And because of the avoidance, there's no integration. How can we look at another scenario where we club these spaces with a larger communal space so that people can integrate? How can we look at designs where one person from a low-income housing can come and enjoy the park as a person from another neighborhood? Can we look at designs like that? This one is what get me really thinking about it. So this project is by big architects. Again, the architect is the guy with the sharp balconies, the one that you saw. And this project was selected by the United Nations, which was a competition to propose designs to mitigate rising sea levels. So this guy had an interesting idea as to why don't we just move to the water, instead of building on land. So as cool as it can be, the problem with these kind of designs is, like, you have given up living on land so easily. Like, you messed it up and now you want to exploit the water too. And you're saying this is cool, but you have not foreseen the problems that this may cause. What about the aquatic life? Like, there is a whole research that can go behind this. So, and this was chosen as a project to be built. I really pray it doesn't come up. So at this point, I was questioning myself, like, what am I doing? What am I doing as an architect? Where are my childhood influences? All that passion, all that energy I had. Like, how can I put it forth and come up with an architecture that serves the people, that put people first, and is also in harmony with nature, especially in today's time when we face climate change, when there are lack of connecting spaces, where there is a lack of motivating spaces. What can architecture do? What is the potential of architecture in today's time? So what I've done is I call it architecture that is authentic, or authentic architecture. And I've put down 3 principles that that is needed in order for architecture to be authentic with the user and with nature. And I would like to share that with you. So the first principle that I could put is architecture for a purpose. When I say architecture for a purpose, it is very important to have a vision for your project. A vision can look like a space to be inspired, to grow or to dream, to grow in unity, in love and be whole, a space to heal, a space to revive, to instill values of hope, faith and love. And when I say these are the values, I'm looking at these serving as the core of the design. So every design move you make, every change, every material that you add will always revolve around these core values. So for the architect and for the client, it is very important to first establish your vision of the project. Your vision, clients come to us saying that we need a house that should be built in Greek style with this kind of, it's all about the style, but I think we need to shift from that. We need to move from that. And it's not about style, it's about the quality of spaces. It's about what values are you trying to bring through that space. And what this purpose can do is, it gives you a new lifestyle. And a new configuration of spaces, new definition of spaces. This might be a little stark proposal for architects in the room, I'm aware, but this is how I see it. Imagine you go to the doctor, you have some health issue and you go to the doctor. The doctor prescribes medicine based on your health issue, right? It is very specific. It is not a generic set of medicines that is given to everybody, because you need a set of medicines that can cure your health issue. The same way, architecture cannot be, it cannot be applied to everybody the same way. A house which has like living room, bedroom spaces, kitchen, bathrooms, those are the, when we say a house, that stops there. But is that the only requirement we need? Like, can we look at a house in a different way based on individual person's requirement? Our physical needs, our mental needs, our spiritual needs. Can we re-look at what spaces mean and how they connect? Can we look at a kitchen that is also a farm? Can we look at a living room that is common between you and the neighbor? Is it possible? Like, yes, we can get into this dialogue of shifting our perceptions about what spaces mean and how they connect, but what is the intention behind these spaces. So to give you an example, if the purpose of a project is to grow in unity, love and be whole, the architect and the client will now design a new lifestyle, not just a set of rooms or coming up with a master plan, but it's about understanding what the person needs to do in order to achieve what the client is trying to achieve, to become a better version of himself or herself. And I have put down, for example, like some of the examples can be, there need to be more personal time, or you need a space to meditate and pray, or to connect with family, to soak in nature. So the change in lifestyle now will dictate what kind of spaces you need and what should be the relation between these spaces. So for example, can we have a space that can also be modified as a meditation space, where the fourth wall now is the nature itself? Can we have a living room where you're so immersed in nature and it takes on a very informal arrangement that you are free to be yourself and not stifled by the rigid arrangement of your furniture in the living room? Can we look at a flexibility like that? Can we look at a dining space that's just an alcove? Instead of sitting at the long table where you're so far you cannot have a conversation. Can you look at something that's more intimate, where you're so close that you have to look at the face of the other person who's sitting next to you and have a conversation? Can you look at something like that? And all these spaces are designed with keeping in mind about the proportions, because proportions, humans react to proportions in a very interesting way. That's a topic for another frat talk. But these materials, proportions, the styles that it's built in, all impact us in the way we think. Or can we look at a bathroom, a shower, which is, in the house, but still is a part of the outdoor space. So these are some of the examples that can be applied for a house, for example, for instance. But this can be also looked into a hospital. Can spaces heal? Can architecture heal the patients? We know the designs of hospitals today makes people feel intimidated and more worried because they are so aware of that they're in a hospital. And it's hard for the patient to break out of that notion. So how can we relook at designing of hospitals? How can we relook at designing schools where children are put in like a classroom arrangement, and they have all the high tech in the room, but can we teach students in outdoor spaces, helping each student be themselves, encourage their individuality right from that age? Can we do that? These are the questions I'm actually throwing out to you guys. So the second principle is natural. If architecture has to be authentic, it has to be natural. And so the first set of principles I looked at was to be authentic to the user, and the second set of principles that I'm looking at is to be authentic to nature, as to how our decisions can impact nature. So if we talk about natural in today's time, we see a lot of buildings like this, where green is just pasted on top of the buildings. And they call it sustainability. But what in fact happens is there are layers of technical devices, it's super expensive, and this is commercialized. The amount and the expenses that is gone behind manufacturing a building like this is actually not sustainable in the first place. But it gets them certificates, or it gets them recognized, oh, we are a green building. So it is important also for the lay people to be aware of these practices in the industry, so that when you have to make a decision, you can use these awareness when you have to take a call. So I'm going to share with you one project specifically. This is in Kerala again, designed by Daniel. And he has used the local materials of that place to design this house. It's a very humble house. Here, I'm not going to talk about the design qualities, but it's all about the materials and how it responds to nature. So this house is built with the local clay and mud. It uses recycled materials. It's climate responsive. It uses rainwater for all the water needs. It uses solar panels for its energy requirements. So it's completely sustainable. The walls that you see on the sides are made of rammed earth. And that is a material that, which is nothing but taking earth and then pressurizing it so that it's firm enough, and then you can build a whole structure with it. So this is also to make you aware that can building with local materials be beautiful? Can we achieve the same quality? Because people do worry about, oh no, I'm not sure if it looks good. If it's going to be too raw, I don't want to look like I'm a tribal person living in some kind of primitive house. It can be beautiful. Design is possible. Design has no limitations. So like I mentioned, for example, this particular image, you can see there are these louvers. And louvers are, it's called jali in Indian terms. And jali is used to allow for wind to circulate in but cut the glare of the sun. Unlike here, there we don't prefer much sun because it's really hot and humid. So how can we have interventions like these, like in architecture itself, that can allow for a comfortable, pleasant atmosphere in the house through design elements? And there is a pond in the living room which helps in evaporative cooling, so that cools down the space. Or can we have moments where there is a blur between the inside and outside? How can we look at designing spaces where you are connected with the outside while you're inside the house? So these second set of principles, like I said, this is only for a house, but we can also take this to another level of any other project. So how can your choice of using natural materials or your choice of designing in response to the climate impact in a bigger way on the construction industry? Believe it or not, almost the major contributor of, I think around 50% of construction industry contributes to the global warming. And this is something that's not spoken about. So how can we take care of these issues in the context of climate change? And the last principle is receive and give. Now I put this in here because this is also part of my journey that I realized that everything is cyclic. You receive, you give. And we talk about this all the time in church. You give more, you receive more. And nature, for example, is the best example. It's a dynamic exchange, always. The moment you receive and you stop, it becomes selfish and stagnant. And architecture is the same. You cannot impose a building on a place without giving back to the nature or giving back to people around it, because then it becomes a selfish piece or an object. How can you be more selfless and be aware of, that you're borrowing things from nature, from whom we take so relentlessly? How can we give back to nature and people? So, can we look at building less and growing more? Can we look at building only what is necessary? Building, let's say if you have one additional guest room, can we look at not having the guest room in a house design and having more flexible space and giving that space for a garden in your house? Can you look at having shared farms in a community where you grow your own food? Today, again, we are more aware of the energy that's gone into food production, about the origin and security of the food we eat. Can we grow our own food? Can that be a part of the lifestyle itself? And the good thing about having farms, which are also called as urban farms, is it gives you a moment to connect with your neighbor or to connect with your family. So it just doesn't stop at doing a good thing for nature, but it's also doing a good thing for you. And this is an example where how can we use spaces like the terrace of your building, because of the lack of space for urban farming. You can also use your windowsill or maybe a vacant lot in your community space or the courtyard of a school. Can you look at these spaces becoming urban farms, which is a contributor, and these are sustainable. These are sustainable, definitely. How can you give back to the community? So this project is in Africa, built by Francis Carey, who is an architect practicing in Europe. And this project is built with the local people. He designed the building in a way that the local people are employed. They use only the materials that's available in that perimeter. And like I said, it's climate responsive, it's completely sustainable. So a single decision to use materials and to build locally gave the local people an opportunity to be employed. And what it did was, it built a sense of pride among those people who now build more structures in a sustainable way and they develop their own village, who otherwise didn't have that knowledge. So can you empower communities through design? Can you do that? Is that possible? These people, like in an interview, they said, we love it. Now they have a sense of improving their quality of life. Now that they know that they have some expertise, they already had their local knowledge, but they needed a clear sense of direction. So how can architects and clients can work together in making wise choices as to how can you give back to communities? And how can we look at empowering people through our designs? And the last one, I would say the most important one, is give to yourself. When I say give to yourself, I am talking about caring for you, caring for us. We talk about giving to others, to be generous, and I realized you cannot give when you don't have. You need to be full, you need to be whole. Only when you love yourself, you can love another person. Only when you respect yourself, you can respect another person. And it is so important that we realize the value and the identity of us, because in today's time, people label us in a jiffy. People give us names like we are tagged by the society. How can we shred all that and find our true value, who we are, and give to ourselves first, and be whole and full, and then give back to others, genuinely, authentically, and back to nature. Because, so as I was working on this presentation and through this journey, the question that kept coming back to me is Alfonso's famous question: what's the point? What's the point of all this? And it's true, that's a question that's lingering in most of our minds. I can tell you guys to build sustainably, or to build, be aware of these impacts, or build a new lifestyle, but what's the point? It might stick with you for a day or two, but what's the point? And that is a question we need to ask ourselves. We need to ask ourselves and find out the reason why we exist. the purpose why I'm here. This is amazing, because all this happened to me because one day I was so frustrated. I was so broken that I had to sit down, shred away all the tags that society had told me about, take away all my degrees and accolades and whatever, and just sit there in stillness and ask God as to who am I and what am I to do here? What is my purpose? What is my identity? And these questions gave rise to my whole journey of In Search of Authenticity. And it's amazing. God is merciful. He is amazing. Like when you ask questions, He does give you answers. He gives you answers. Believe me, it's from my personal experience. And you realize I'm the child of God, and I'm here for this in this specific time for a specific purpose. Like Father Kelly mentioned today, we all have purposes. We all are children of God, and we all have a very important gift to give to the world, especially in this time. You're not here for some random reason. Each one of you, trust me, have a very important gift. And you have to realize what you are to give. And you have to realize your worth, your identity. And that is why it's so important to give to yourself and make yourself full and then give back to the community. Only when you can do that, you are authentic to yourself and you're authentic to another person and to nature. Thank you.
Questions? Comments?
I would like to explain me the one that you showed before. The people in the world doing this, I don't understand. What is that?
Oh, this one? So this one is a construction site of the project that I showed you right here. It's a school, and this community didn't have any means to build a school. So the architect and the local people decided that they're going to do it with the local materials because it's very cheap. It's low cost. The architect decided that why don't we use the knowledge that the people already have? They have been building houses. It's just that they didn't have a clear sense of harnessing the knowledge in the right way. So how can we make use of that and employ the people, and make them aware that what the knowledge that they have is valuable and can use it. So this image shows the construction of the school. It's fascinating. Because I read the interview, and these people have an improved quality of life because now they're able to carry on projects without an architect to direct them.
Good.
Yeah.
So this is a great presentation. Thanks so much. I learned so much. How do you apply all of these in your personal work or a company that you work for? Because it must be hard, to, as in any realm of sustainability, it must be really hard to have these ideas if you work for an architectural firm or anything like that.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you for asking that question. That is true. It is very difficult, especially when you're in a place where everything works for profit, everything works for revenue. So what I do is I remind myself every day before stepping out of my house as to what my purpose is and how I can hold on to these values. So during my days in the office, when design decisions have to be made, I stand my ground and I try to put an extra effort to convince or to share as to what is an alternative way that we can look at. The company that I work with does a lot of high-end residential work. That gentleman over there, he's aware of the firm. The thing is, in these kind of firms, it's very hard to impose an idea, but I try to hold on to my values and to inspire the people in the way I can for now. And sometimes, I do feel discouraged because of the resistance that you experience on a way, especially when you're trying to fight against the norm. It's really hard. I'm not saying it's easy. It's not an easy job, guys. It's really hard. So when you go towards that, in that path, all I can do is to hold on to the belief that I'm doing something good, and this is what God has asked me to do, and I will do it no matter what. So if not the firm, I will use platforms like these where I can inspire people. I will reach out to communities and serve in whatever way I can. This is only in the beginning. So
Yeah, and also, I mean, like, you can plant the seed, you know? And, like,
Exactly.
in the future, it's like, people are more, like, beginning to demand more and more change in the buildings, you know? Then your seed is just gonna grow.
absolutely.
Thank you for the presentation. That was very eye-opening. I'm no architect. I'm a musician, and I'm just starting to like spin around like how can I make my space better and start with myself. So I would ask you like what do you do for yourself, like living in New York City? I mean, I don't really know what your living conditions are, but like I live in a small studio.
It's not that bad.
So I was just thinking, you know, it's a space where I spend a lot of time trying to make music and like work on my art, and it can be very like I don't feel energized even though I put a lot out by me like producing music. I feel like how could I possibly be talking about this if I don't apply it to myself? So do you live by that? Like what is it that you do, if there's anything in your own space that could be the start to like the tip of the iceberg to like, you know, start to apply this into your own life?
Good question, tough question. If I have to give you the tip of the iceberg that you're talking about,
Right.
especially in a city like New York where there are a lot of constraints, what I do is I let in nature as much as I can. You know, let the sunlight in. You know, how many times do we enjoy the sun? Like I've seen people, oh, it's too harsh. Oh, I need sunscreen. I didn't put on my, cream. Like embrace nature. Let our relationship with nature be so blurred that we will forget where we end and where nature begins. I'm telling this to you because of my own experiences. Nature has inspired me so much in my work, and as a musician, I can tell you we always look for creative inspiration. And a space, built space can maybe not provide all that, but when you let the nature in terms of sunlight, or open your windows and not this winter time maybe, but as much as you can, and have plants in your room, like have green your space, opt for natural materials instead of IKEA manufactured, so make these choices, make these deliberate choices. And maybe I can have a sit-down conversation with you and understand what your personality is like and what you need. That's another conversation in further discussion. But to begin with, I would say please open your windows and let the light in. Let the light in. That is important. Light makes us happy. Sun makes us happy. You experiences, right? So that's the beginning.
Thank you.
I liked how you mentioned when you were talking about project housing and things like that, because I do feel like in a lot of spaces, the lower the income, the more oppressive the space, or even just like the way that we design prisons and detention centers are just so oppressive. And I was wondering in your classes when you were in school, if the way that architecture makes people feel, or like even the conversation around the design plans for spaces like this was ever, and like the impact on people was ever discussed or prioritized, and how better to like advocate or just talk about the importance of that just like for the future.
So in schools, it depends on which school you go, because different schools have different approach to architecture. It's like fashion. A school might be more contemporary, or one school might be looking at more, that revolutionary classical approach of architecture. So I don't mention the name of my school now at this point, but I would say no. That's the thing that bothers me, because today we look at architecture as object and as an art. It is an art, I don't deny that, but it cannot stop there. And there were some courses that I've taken which had to do with urban design. I love urban design too. And in those courses we spoke about everything but people. And I raised a question to my professor, like, why aren't we talking about people? And all he said was, Jinsi, that's a good point, So it is sad it is sad that the trajectory, the education, the discourse itself is moving so far that we think that it's all about space and space and space and nothing else. It's a kind of obsession. But I think it's important that in whatever way I could contribute, I could spark that question in my class, help other people also to be aware that we cannot look at architecture without people. It is not possible. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
So great talk. It was really enjoyable. And so at first I wanted to ask you about the accessibility of this kind of approach, because it seemed to me that it was like a very expensive approach to architecture when you were starting your talk. But after that, you kind of touched into that. And so my other explanation for the absence of this kind of approach is the question I have, and sorry because I don't have like a better way to express it, but is there intellectual laziness preventing this kind of approach to become more widespread, or is it something else?
Intellectual laziness. That's a nice term.
I mean, laziness or disinterest, because you just mentioned disinterest, so that could be one explanation. The other could be because, I mean, right now you talk, Christopher? Like, let me understand your personality. Let me understand what you need from your small studio. But I mean, it takes a lot of effort to do that for every person.
It does, yes.
So is that a limiting factor?
It is not a limiting factor, but it's not a quick factor. The process can be long, just like you pointed out. And the thing is, in architecture especially, because if you make the process long, it becomes an expensive process. And if you're looking at making money, this cannot work. So the question is, what is more important to you? Money or values? And it's that decision that you have to make. So maybe to point out what you said, yes, it is a way of not using or not intellectual laziness, but also there are architects who believe what they're doing is perfect and is right. The examples that I showed you earlier, if you ask them about their approach, they can explain to you and convince you why their approach is perfect and it works. So if you are a person who didn't know about a more humble approach and how much damaging it is, you would buy that person's argument or that person's explanation. So it's also different approaches as to how can I explain this. It's like some people when they wear a Balenciaga bag or shoe, they think it's cool, and for some person, if I just wear something under my feet, that is great enough. So it's a different approach altogether. Like, what do you mean? What does shelter mean to you? What does space mean to you? What is an approach that you're looking for? So it's personal belief, I would say. It's your experiences that tame you, and like I said, it's all my exploration that made me realize this, and my influences early childhood. So what about the architects in the room? Do you have any? You can chime in, please.
Yeah, I mean, the issue about intellectual laziness, it's interesting that most of the cities are designed by architects and buildings and so forth, but behind them are the developers and the banks, and they have all the money. So they control the quality of design, because if they have a lot of money and you get the famous architect put to design the famous buildings, those other architects that don't get the
That's true. It is where the money comes from, and in fact, that's the reason why it should start from. The policy should change. The rules should change, but more importantly, the minds of the common people have to be awakened, because it is what you guys ask for that goes into the policies, that goes in. You guys being the client, and you guys come to us. So it's almost like an education. We have to make the common people aware of what's happening. We'll start with rules.
Yeah, I guess I had a comment because I work in political advocacy, so a lot of what we're doing is calling for governments to meet their human rights obligations, and this is an example of how something like architectural design can actually fulfill human rights, like that people are supposed to have shelter is a basic right, as is food, as is safety, and to have people not abusing you and stuff like that. Those are rights for children and for all humans. So when you design a space with that in mind, it's doing a lot more than just bringing like a personal piece. It's actually fulfilling something that all our governments have been called to do. So I think, like what you're saying, it is a paradigm shift that we need for all the people on the ground, so that we start like demanding to have architecture that is good for nature and good for ourselves. But it's also like a responsibility of from the top down, from governments and from people with like that power to, you know, actually institute and change these systems that are, you know, perpetuating environmental destruction or, you know, isolating low-income communities like you had mentioned. So
yeah, absolutely, that's so true. Yeah, governments also have to be people like with power. You know, I think it's important that they also keep in mind as to what's happening and make sensible decisions. Yeah, that's true.
So one thing that occurred to me as you were speaking, and something that seems to kind of lurk in the background, I don't know if this is true, but is a sense of the sacred, and that sort of came through when you were talking about the countryside in India, watching the light, watching the water. Could you talk more about how a sense of the sacred has informed architecture, can inform architecture? What role do you see the sacred taking on in your own architectural work or in architecture today?
I could so imagine this question from you.
I didn't mean to be obvious. But do you know what I mean? Like like, I mean, our architecture has always had a sacred function, the importance of the temple.
Yes.
I'm thinking of monastic architecture in the church, and it seems to get at a sense of wholeness.
Yes. Yes, there is definitely a deep influence. So the exploration that I keep talking about, you know, my own spiritual exploration, personal exploration, I realized that we are divine beings. We are people, but we also have, just like how it was read in the second reading, our body is a temple. You know, and the way we relate to these spaces also is not just on a very five sensory perceptive level. There's subconscious impact that's going on. So when we are looking for an impact on the physical, mental, and spiritual, you know, health, architecture does take on a different meaning. When we understand that it's not just serving the purpose of functional aesthetics, like I mentioned before, it's more to do with your subconscious mind, your thinking. Because I'm sure many of you are aware, like it's your thinking that becomes actions, and your actions become your character, and your character becomes your destiny, right? You all got this. So it can start from as simple as your thinking, your mind. And if we do not look at an architecture that has so much impact on mind, on a person's destiny, we will look at it only as as elements, as like walls, windows, and floor and roof. But there's more to it. There is sacredness. Yes, there is sacredness. There is an effort to be made that is in unison with the person who is using the space. Yeah, did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, there is. I think it stems from my childhood experiences for sure.
Is there any institutions here in New York that are applying these type of philosophies?
So, a short answer, no. There are some firms that look at building with natural materials, but then something is compromised. You know, like the design is compromised, or it's built with natural materials, so there might not be so much connection with the design of spaces. So there is a compromise made somewhere, but it's not come together and seen like it has to be in harmony with the user, to be in harmony with nature. Like this is what I said to myself, like if If your design is in harmony with nature, it is definitely in harmony with you. It cannot go wrong. Like that is for sure. Yeah, there are no firms or institutions that are looking into this yet.
What you're saying, it's also inspiring, but the reality of it is most of the people that cannot afford to hire an architect to really help them build a space or create a space that's what's good for them, they usually would just hire a builder. They could build a space just to, a space to live.
That's true.
It's so frustrating, and it's like, you know, you've studied so many years, and then you want to do good things, but financially you have to survive.
Yes.
And that's the frustrating thing or challenging thing with the architects.
That is true. So architecture is one of the most expensive courses if you want to recommend this to your people who ask you career advice. And it doesn't pay you well also.
That's right.
So it takes a lot of time to pay back your tuition. So that is why, you know, architecture like this comes into play, where we build from low-cost materials as available. Every place is abundant with its resources, whether in Africa, India, Europe, or America. Place, you know, you have clay everywhere. So can we look at building something that's low-cost, that can be done with the help of local people? So it's again a different approach, you know. Yes, we cannot build expensive, and people cannot afford, everybody cannot afford a high-end architecture, but this is something we can do for the communities, right? Any more questions? Well, I hope, first of all, I thank you for being such an amazing group of people. I love your questions, I love your contributions. All I will say is, when you leave from here today, please remember, give to yourself, let this stay with you. Know that each of you, your decisions contribute on a much, much bigger level, okay? And you can touch base with me. I come to this parish for 11 months. So if you want to have conversations, you can do that, but let it stay with you. Okay, thank you.